So has a lot changed in terms of our knowledge of some of the medications that you talked about from 10 days ago?
I think there's been some change and some updates with respect to the utilization of remdesivir, the antiviral that has been made the kind of standard of care. What I see happening now is we're seeing the emergence of studies that combine antivirals and anti-inflammatories. So I think that the accessibility of this drug as a first-line choice is probably facilitating a lot of those studies. I'm also seeing more in the media related to nitric oxide and gaseous nitric oxide as that. There are now multiple study sites around the country looking at tank-based nitric oxide, but certainly I think there is an opportunity for the delivery of a nitric oxide in unique ways, ways of generating it that are not as costly as just having a random tank. And this is actually something I'm personally working on much earlier stages in the gaseous form, as that is already FDA approved for the use in pulmonary hypertension. But I think that there is some general acceptance that nitric oxide might be a multifaceted pathway because it's both antiviral and anti-inflammatory. So you kind of do the same thing as you were doing with an antiviral and a maybe monoclonal antibody targeting, whether it be IL-6 or IL-1, maybe even TNF alpha. So you kind of hit both of those with one potential agent. But I think what's probably changing the most is our understanding of the relationship between the skin and this infection. And as of right now, the CDC has not stated that there are any particular skin findings that are true markers of disease as compared to anosmia or lack of taste. But more and more evidence is coming out in the literature. There was just this past week, right after the webinar, a paper released looking at several hundred cases of COVID-19 and looking at the skin findings, when they manifested, and could they be potentially good prognostic features. And what we're seeing, both from the study, but also I'm seeing in my own practice, is that many of these patients who develop what are called COVID toes, or as one of my residents says, TOVIDs, that this often occurs after having true symptoms of infection, if at all. But a lot of these patients are viral specific test negative, meaning the PCR for RNA or specific genes is negative, yet they're still antibody positive, means they were exposed. So it could actually be a biomarker for condition resolution, or maybe a good prognostic feature. We don't know yet, but there's mounting evidence to that. And also I'll say that there are mounting data sets being collected at different hospitals. So those are probably the biggest changes that I'm seeing, at least in the last week. And also I think the numbers are also improving. I'm hopeful, but I'm also hopeful that people don't misinterpret this and behave like morons and go outside in groups without masks on, which I am starting to see as well.
Okay. Now, how important is it? I know remdesivir is only in IV form. How important is it to come up with a therapeutic that is basically in pill form, something that you could get from prescribed before you end up in that emergency setting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be ideal. Obviously, intravenous route is going to be limiting to a hospital setting. So wouldn't it be great? I almost liken this to, and I have no conflict of interest, Tamiflu, which is pill form, and people take, they start feeling feverish during flu season. So I think the rapid adaptability and acceptability would be high. So I think it would be great to have something like that. And actually, that question also reminded me of something evolving in the last week, more evidence supportive of anti-hormonal therapy as, to your point, something that's rapidly distributable, but also something that may be even preventative before you even get to a point of being mild, moderate, or severe. There's growing evidence that anti-hormonal therapy can limit infection because in order for the entry point, ACE2, to receive the virus in a way that is meaningful for the virus, it has to be primed by a serine protease that in itself is activated by androgens like DHT binding to a promoter site on its gene. So it looks like, one, from that mechanistic perspective, but also the evidence that we're seeing worse disease in men, and we're seeing worse disease in individuals who have signs of hyperandrogenism or androgen sensitivity, like pattern hair loss, as we saw from a study in Europe, that maybe anti-hormonal therapies for women, spironolactone, for men, finasteride, could actually confer some protection or limit the severity of disease by limiting the entry of the virus at the epithelium or the epithelial surface. So that's also something new that came out. There was just a paper speaking to this effect. I think that came out maybe a day or two ago. So also something new, but also those are oral therapies. Those are much more accessible than something that's intravenous.
Okay. Now, as we're testing all these existing drugs, if something does work, how much time do we need to produce enough since the disease is moving so rapidly? How much time would we need? So even if something works, we still don't have enough of it to treat all the people who now
Right.
have this virus.
So I think it really depends. You know, you're talking about if you're thinking about a monoclonal antibody, like the ones being studied as a treatment for cytokine storm, antibodies take a lot more time to make, and they're much more expensive to make. If you're talking about pill, it really depends. I mean, we saw the issue emerge when it was touted that hydroxychloroquine was the best next thing to slice bread for the treatment of this, which actually the data does not support that. But we saw shortages almost instantly. That said, industry was able to rev up pretty quickly and churn out a ton of pills. So I think pills, non-small molecule inhibitors, to push that aside because those are a little more complicated, but medications have been around for quite some time. I think there probably will be greater ease to mobilize and ramp up versus an intravenous formulation or a monoclonal antibody. But I think it's going to be very dependent on the actual product itself, to be quite honest. Where can you make it? I mean, you might be limited to a couple factories around the country that are GMP and have the ability to make these. And so it all depends. I think it's going to be a case by case basis.